Okay, we can continue.
And so it was broadcasted live. Was that in the course of the whole church, or during Preston Bradley's reign?
The radio broadcast began in 1924.
Okay.
Before the church was built, the church met in various theaters in Uptown.
Okay.
And then he decided he wanted a building, and then that's when they built the one on Lawrence Avenue.
And that had the broadcasting capabilities, but at one point it was recorded. The sermons would be recorded. Would you have to drive them out to different stations?
Mm-hmm.
I thought, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was, I think, in the 60s.
So your role, did that ever change? That was, you were pretty much the runner for the recorded?
No, the person who recorded them did. I just did a couple of times when he wasn't able to take it out.
Okay.
But it was WLS, and I think it was out in Itasca, big radio station. But otherwise, 1924 is before my time, so I don't know about the original ones.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And that was when you could drive. Before you're driving and the chauffeur, you're just kind of an extra hand in the office.
Mm-hmm. I was the runner. I counted the money.
Okay.
At that time, you had to roll the money, so it all had to be put in wrappers. And at that time, we got a lot of money, so that was a lot of work. And his famous saying was, if you're going to put $1 in the offering, perhaps you could make it 5. If you're going to put 5, maybe you could make it 10. If you're going to give 10, maybe you give 20. If you're going to give 20, don't change your mind.
Sorry, back to the radio station. Do you remember hearing feedback or how widespread that radio was?
It went to many, many states around Illinois. We did hear from people from Iowa, from even sometimes way out west, depending on the weather and how, because the stations did have a large broadcast area. And so we did get a lot of written communication from people who had heard him in there, near, like in Minnesota, Wisconsin, places like that.
Do you remember listening or corresponding with anybody that had written into the church?
I didn't personally, but the office did.
Okay.
Yes, letters were answered.
Okay. Had you had any conversations with family or anybody else about the radio station?
Occasionally people would come and visit Chicago, and they'd come to church and they would mention how they listened to him every Sunday. And so we did. Well, even today we get people whose parents had listened to him, or they remember the radio broadcasts, and they stop in to see what the church is like.
And then do you remember the separate radio program after he retired?
You mean the 5-minute program?
Yeah.
Yes. He broadcasted 5 minutes to 6 in the morning and 5 minutes to midnight every day, and could say more in 5 minutes than he could when he preached for almost an hour.
Yeah.
Because it was very concise. It gave a specific message that really was important to the listeners.
All right. And then, did anybody hearing like feedback from people? Did they mention like anything specific? How they had been touched by either his message or radio program?
People would talk about how he's influenced their life, yes. He always preached to the broken heart, and because he said there is a broken heart in every pew. And that's why he really made that direct contact with people, whether it was on the radio or in person, because it really touched their life and gave them a message for improving their life or just meeting the day-to-day challenges.
Yeah, so over the radio or in the congregation of a couple thousand, that there would be an individual that could relate. Would he talk about anything personal?
You mean of sharing his own life experiences? Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I think I remember the 5-minute radio program too would be a little bit of personal stories.
And of course, the most famous one is when he was climbing up to do some work on the roof, and then he was afraid to come down when he was a teenager, and his mother kept saying, "Keep looking up, Preston, keep looking up," and that's what helped him get down the ladder. And then that became his saying also to people, "But do you have difficulties? Keep looking up," or tie a knot in the end of your rope and hang on. That was another famous saying that he did.
In the 5-minute message, he was talking about a poem that inspired the motion detector.
Yeah, motion detector.
Did that light go off, or is it still on?
Yeah.
I think that's on. Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's the
Yeah, it was
same.
just motion detector.
Okay.
So
So let's restart the question.
yeah. Well, it was pretty much about the keep looking up phrase that I remember a poem that he read in the 5-minute messages, that the poem was an inspiration, but yeah, that's interesting that story about fixing the roof.
Mm-hmm.
That was in Michigan in his childhood.
Mm-hmm. Linden, Michigan.
And okay, so in the conversations like about the church that you would have with Dr. Bradley, would he talk about his goals, or if he would like the church to go in a specific direction?
Not quite sure how to answer that, because he had a specific direction and he kept the church moving in that direction. He wasn't concerned about the militia that we are today, like paying the gas bill, or is the plaster falling down. He didn't have those problems. And if he did, he wasn't concerned about it because somebody else was handling that.
Yeah, it seemed like a kind of a self-sustaining system,
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you were helping out and you found a place to lend your talents. So when did that become like a personal, or when did you become treasurer?
Oh, that's been Oh, I'd say in the last 10 years. It's pretty recent.
Okay. All right. What was your we got your childhood in the church. Your adulthood in the church was that was kind of a consistent member. I mean, you've been a consistent member. What were there phases?
I'm sorry?
Were there phases?
Phases? I was just trying to say, when we were 14, we had a large Sunday school. And when you reached the age of 14, you could go through like a dedication, where you talked, I guess similar to catechism and all that. I don't know much about that. But we had some training and studied the Bible. And then you went through a ceremony where we each received a Bible, and we had a sponsor, and that was done during the church. And then that's when you could join the church. When you were 14, if you went through the dedication. Otherwise, originally it was 16. At age 16, you could join the church. And then I also joined a choir at that time.
Okay. And then it was soon after that you moved?
I'm sorry?
Was it soon after that you had moved out of the city?
Oh, no, because I was 21 when we moved out of the city.
Okay.
But I still kept coming back. And I tried other churches in Palatine. Palatine is 30 miles away from People's Church. But they're too concerned with creeds and too biblical and all this. He talked about taking the message of Jesus and applying it to your everyday life. And he never got involved with creeds and all these doctrines and things that other churches do, which is why he fit in well with the Unitarians, and then later also joined with the United Church of Christ, because we were more accepting of everybody's thoughts and the way they looked at the Bible or the way they read the Bible. And he was definitely a follower of Jesus, definitely taught Jesus' messages, but didn't agree with creeds and doctrines and all that many churches put on you. And so it was just a way of living. He helped you with your day-to-day life and your attitude towards people and all that.
I think from our conversation before, and something that resonated with me was like the measles and the mumps.
Mm-hmm. The mumps and measles of religion is what he called them.
Okay.
And he didn't have time for the mumps and measles.
Okay. So you'd kind of skip over portions that were not really agreeable, or I guess most accessible.
I think Ben is asking, what did he mean by the phrase the mumps and measles of religion? Could you explain that, please?
This would be like the doctrines that certain churches have, and since I've never been raised in that kind of philosophy, it's kind of hard to define them. But they're, one thing he kept preaching about too was that like in the Catholic Church, if a child dies before they're baptized, they're consent. I don't know. And he said, that's ridiculous. This child has done nothing. Why would this child be chastised because he died before he'd been baptized or christened? Well, we christened. I guess the Catholics baptized. And it's, it's those kind of dogmas that other churches have that you have to follow, that he didn't see that as important. And so we don't have any rules or regulations that we have to follow. Like eating meat, I guess, during Lent, things like that. I don't know.
But some traditions were embraced, like the Easter was kind of a tradition.
Right, yeah, and we had Holy Week services. And on Monday, Thursday, he would break the bread and had the wine, but that was it. We never passed anything around. It was just the demonstration of what that would have been. But we did have service, I'm not sure about Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday to Friday, we definitely had service. And then even after, when we had other pastors that came, they maintained the Good Friday service, but didn't do the Wednesday evening. And then he would do, throughout the year, he would do book reviews on Wednesday evening. And those were well attended. But then our church opened the third Sunday in September and closed the second Sunday in June, which was, I understand, a Unitarian tradition. Their churches usually are closed during the summer. And he would take off and go to Europe. And he loved to sail on the British ships. And then he had contacts in Europe where he was expected to preach every summer. And so he maintained that European connection also. And then spent August up at his island, Black Duck Island, in Minnesota, because he loved the water and just found that very refreshing and reviving. In fact, Danny sent me an article about Preston Bradley and the Old Man and the Sea, because the sea was an important part of his life.
You think that one reason that attracted him to Uptown, being on Lake Michigan?
Well, he would have enjoyed, he lived in Lincoln Park and could see Lake Michigan from his apartment.
Oh.
So yes, he would, there were many references to the sun coming up over the water, the peacefulness of the water and all this. So
Okay.
that, the sea was important to him, yes.
Do you think that was like a theme in some of his messages?
Yeah.
Okay. And so his transition after he left after your family had moved out, and you were a working woman at that point.
He and his wife moved to Vermont.
Okay.
His personal secretary, that from his office at his home, was Ethel Smalley, and she had retired and moved to the area with the Von Trapps. In fact, she's worked for the Von Trapp family for a while, and then Dr. Bradley and his wife June liked the area, and so he moved over there for after he was not able to continue preaching on Sunday. His health wasn't that good. And
do you know if there was any like contingency plan, or if there was some other preachers that he was fond of, but was there anybody that was like going to take over?
one of the questions you had given me was any weaknesses that he had, and that was a weakness. He could not perceive of somebody else. He couldn't work with somebody else. So there was never the plan to continue the church when he was no longer the minister of the church. And we did have a few assistant ministers, but it just didn't work out because he was so famous, he was so in charge, and it was not easy for him to accept somebody else to work with him. And so no, there was no contingency plan for the church. And when he passed away, it was quite turmoil for a while till we had someone who could take over and maintain the Sunday services.
And what the church is now, I mean, it's a fraction of the size, but it is. How do you think Dr. Bradley would look back or look on this church?
Well, he'd be pleased that the church is still operating, and pleased the church is still open and affirming, that we accept everybody. That had always been his philosophy. There was never any prejudice. He accepted people from all walks of life, all social, all ethnic groups. They were all encouraged by his message because it was such a positive message. He also had a big following in the south side of Chicago, and he would go every year and preach at some of the churches there. So in the change now with the open and affirming, he would have been very accepting of that because he accepted all people. And then of course the church became involved with the Buddhist temple in Uptown, and he and the Buddhist priest would exchange pulpits occasionally. And
Did you have anything you want to share?
well, he would also be happy that we still have a social action program, that we're working with the homeless.
Was that ever a plan that that like Anderson Hall could be used as a shelter?
Not during his lifetime, because there wasn't a need at that time.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
All right. But yeah, that was the recent addition, and I don't know, has it been 40 years? 30, 40 years?
I'm sorry?
How long has the shelter been there? Because it was a different, what was it? Michael told me. Rest. It was Rest, and then it was Northside Housing. So I think Rest was in the 80s. Is
I think so, yeah.
what Michael was saying. Yeah.
And then Rest as a group dissolved. We used to have classes too, to teach working skills, like work in the office and using a computer, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the empty spoons.
And for a while, we coordinated with North Park College, which is how the fifth floor got redone, remodeled, because they were going to have classes in our church, but then that never really fell through. That's when Don Benedict came, and then did a lot of the remodeling work, but then that kind of died. It was a little too far away from the college, so it didn't succeed like they had planned that it would. But we tried, as a church group, tried to have some classes, and that worked for a while.
You have anything?
Yeah, I have a few follow-up questions. So who was Don Benedict? You mentioned Don Benedict?
Right. He had read in the newspaper that we were having troubles and we were considering closing.
Oh.
This was, of course, after Dr. Bradley had passed away. And so he saw this as he was retiring. He was the director of the Community Renewal Society. And he was retiring, and this was going to be his second career to get involved with People's Church. And he became a minister for a while, but he didn't really like preaching on Sunday. He preferred getting involved with the community and offering services that way. And then that's how Marguerite Vocal came also, because her husband had worked with Don Benedict at the Community Renewal Society. So that was a whole new era and a change.
You had mentioned that Dr. Bradley would go preach in some Southside churches. What were the demographics of the South Side at that
They
time?
were totally black churches.
Do you know what attracted the black churches on the South Side to Preston Bradley and his message?
Not specifically, but just that he accepted all people and was open to going to their church and having them come to our church. But there was a time more of segregation, and he spoke out against the Ku Klux Klan. And it was just a relationship that they had developed.
You mentioned Danny. Who was Danny?
Danny was an assistant that Clement Stone and Preston Bradley were good friends. And Clement Stone kind of adopted Dr. Bradley's self-help philosophy. And, you know, Clement Stone has written many books and has quite a few classes and things like that. And he and Doctor worked together to meet with some of the gangs, which I just recently learned about, and it kind of surprised me. It wasn't very successful, but they tried. And so Clement Stone was a philanthropist, millionaire. He also subsidized part of Dr. Bradley's salary when the church was having so much trouble. And he decided that Doctor needed some help because he was getting older. And so Danny had recently graduated from college and was hired by Clement Stone to be an assistant to Dr. Bradley. And then he also wrote Dr. Bradley's biography.
And Danny is Danny Chandler, right?
Danny Chandler.
Okay. You mentioned Preston Bradley had a direction for the church. What was Dr. Bradley's direction for the church?
To bring a liberal point of view to religion, to make it more open for everybody to come, not have all the restrictions that many churches have, and his philosophy of his self-help philosophy that
You also had mentioned that, and maybe you've already answered this, but that Preston Bradley had his own take on religion. Is there something else that you would like to add on? And that you mentioned once to me that you follow the religion of Preston Bradley.
right.
Could you elucidate on what you meant by that?
Well, he was raised in the Presbyterian Church. He also went to Moody Bible Institute, but he couldn't deal with all the restrictions that would have gone with a Bible church. And he called those the mumps and measles of religion that people got hung up with. And his philosophy was an open one, accepting people and welcoming everybody to his church and not worrying about denominational directives and creeds and things. And so that's why I always felt that he had his own religion, and the people that followed him followed Preston Bradley's religion.
Do you have any other reminiscences to share? I know that you have several notes that you've taken. Is there something else that you would like to share with us?
You know, it's the only church I've ever really known. As I said, when we moved to Palatine, I tried other churches so I wouldn't have to drive so far. But they were too hung up in the mumps and measles, and I just couldn't deal with that. And the openness, the friendliness at People's Church was what attracted me and what's kept me there. Because we have still maintained that today. We still are open, we're still accepting. We have the shelter. If you look at our congregation, you'll see people at all income levels, you'll see all ethnic groups, all racial groups, and it's just a nice mixture of everybody who gets along, and that's I guess we all have the same purpose in life, as accepting and trying to do good.
You had also mentioned that there were social action programs in Dr. Bradley's era. Do you recall what some of those programs were at the church?
Okay. Well, other than the classes that we were teaching,
Yes, whatever programs there were in his time.
For the neighborhoods, things like that. We had many organizations within the church, like the Ushers Club, the Women's Club, the Men's Club, the Professional and Business Women's Club, and they were all large groups of people that worked in those. And also his adopted son, Jimmy Griffin, had the actors, the Uptown Players, was a group of actors from young people in the neighborhood. They would produce plays and things like that. But you know, I was a teenager, so I really wasn't that concerned in all of our dealings with prison work and all that came later as other ministers came on board.
I don't have any other questions. Do you have any other questions?
I messed up. I recorded your questions, and I guess I was one too many things to think about. I forgot to press a button.
Oh.
Yeah, we covered that. I think that covered a lot of things. But I think what wasn't covered, I forgot to press record. So the noteworthy things that Preston Bradley did, you had said he crossed paths with other historical figures.
Right. Yes, he marched with Jane Addams for women's rights. He marched with Martin Luther King. He opposed all forms of religious fundamentalism.
And he did cross paths with Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
He did with FDR. I'm not sure about the relationship with Eleanor.
Okay. What was the appointment?
He was on the committee that formed the United Nations.
Okay. And then your role in the radio, he would broadcast the sermons, and then you would deliver those as well later on. When you were
Originally, the whole church service was broadcast.
Okay.
Broadcast for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then later, we broadcast just the sermon itself, which would be at least half an hour that he would preach. And he never took any notes. He was always ready with an encouraging message. He was an extemporaneous speaker. And so he did a lot of reading. He had a marvelous library in his study. But all that knowledge was in his head. He never had anything written down until he was writing his books. I think it's either 8 or 10 books that he wrote.
Can you start at the beginning of your life in the church? Oh, so your first memory is when you are able to form memories.
That's a good question. I suppose being in the Sunday school, and I would be in Sunday school while my parents were having choir practice before church. My father was a music librarian for the choir also, and it organized boxes and boxes of music, which no longer exists, but
And then you were helping out in the office.
right. There was always a young person that did help in the office, and they were part of the history of the church too. And then it just, as they got older, Mrs. Harrison looked for somebody younger because they became interested in other things besides being so dependable on Sunday morning. And since my parents were in the choir and I was there anyway, I started to become the runner, the gopher.
And you said that there was a certain age limit, or what was that time when you could become a member?
The original bylaws said 16. And then if you had gone through the dedication program through the Sunday school, you could be dedicated at 14, which was the equivalent of joining the church.
Do you remember hearing any rumors, or what was? I guess there's tall tales is all that I really have of Preston Bradley, and I think the biggest one was that Jimmy Hoffa would drop him off at church. That was just one story of that Joseph shared.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where he heard that.
I've never heard that one. And I don't remember seeing Jimmy Hoffa in the church. He did have the Chicago 7 in the church.
Okay.
And he did have them speak.
Huh. Like after the trial? Or that would have been before?
Sometime during that period. I don't know remember exactly.
Okay. And they were, I guess, for the sake of the recording, that they were the crowd that was arrested for protesting.
Oh, could be. That I don't remember.
Okay.
He was controversial. He could stir up trouble because he was so accepting of everybody. He felt it was important to get the other point of view as well. And many people didn't think that was important.
I guess also the context of the church getting built in Uptown, your family living in Uptown, they moved in a different neighborhood within Chicago, and the context of that neighborhood had changed, but you think that the congregation was always consistent mix of?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was always a mix of people, yes. And the radio audience and all that.
You had mentioned before about the staying power of his message, that you would hear that, you would go to a service and then you'd feel good throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. Throughout the week,
Throughout the week.
yes.
You were able to reflect on specific messages? Or do you remember that being particularly helpful?
Well, the one to keep looking up would probably be the most helpful.
And that was the story.
It was a story on the ladder, but
Okay.
that was the time of the Depression and all this, and there were many reasons why people wouldn't feel positive, but yet he gave them a reason to be positive. And like tie a knot in the end of your rope and hang on, There are times when you didn't think you could go on, but you could.
Did that message change like in World War II?
His message never changed.
Message
It was always positive.
Huh. Okay. Some of the themes in like books are how to control worry and kind of not letting anxiety get the best of you.
Right. He was before the self-help people of today, but it was a similar message. And it was a message shared too by Norman Vincent Peale, Dale Carnegie, who were popular at that time.
And you never got the sense that Preston Bradley was trying to push the church forward. He'd kind of established it when you were old enough to remember. He had kind of created these messages and was there interest of him, or did he express any interest in trying to change the church, or wanting it to turn into something else? Did he have goals?
His message was consistent throughout his lifetime. So, no, I wouldn't say that he was changing direction. If anything, he was helping people change their direction to correspond to his.
So let's just take a quick check. And so most of the audio didn't get recorded, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But the camera was also recording audio, right?
Recorded audio with the background noise, including that clean song.
Okay.
So any music.
Okay. So whatever Ben's recording equipment would be a cleaner recording.
Exactly. It's hooked up to her lavalier, so
Okay.
I can get her up.
Okay.
So
I'm going to do a mark real quick, and then
And then we can
because I
wrap it
hadn't
up.
done this process before, press the record button, then
Okay.
do the mark.
yeah.
Mark.
And so can we wrap it up, because I could tell that Virginia's getting tired.
Yeah. I'm just trying to do like,
I mean, we've been talking for well over an hour.
we talked about the radio, community, and then, so after the contingency plan, I don't think that part got recorded with the clean audio. So was he able to make a plan after he retired?
He never retired.
He never retired?
No, he never retired. He became ill, and his wife took him to Vermont.
Okay.
But he never had a plan of succession.
Okay. Yeah, all right. I think that kind of covers the essential questions, and I'll just send Peter the whole file.
Right. Yeah, so we can send him the video file with whatever quality audio it has and that audio file.
Yeah.
Is there a way for those two pieces of equipment to be hooked up so that they're both recording off of those microphones for the next interview?
This one does have a line in, but the problem with that is, well, no, actually that would work. Is as long as you have the line in going to the camera, it'll record and synchronize everything at one source.
Okay. So maybe that's what we should do for the interview with Dan. I still haven't heard from Danny. I can't get a hold of him. I was going to call him yesterday, but it got so busy and so hectic I never got to it. So I'm going to try to call him this afternoon.
Oh, I wonder.
Well, we spent several hours with Joseph's, we talked about this in the car. So Joseph's brother is in town, and he and his James, and he and his wife Edith came to pick up Joseph's stuff. But that ended up being an excursion of going through every single thing and figuring out what they wanted to take and what not.
Oh, wow.
With Michael and me throwing stuff out, and the books that are left behind, we're supposed to donate to the People's Music School if they want those books. I don't think they will because they're like falling apart music books. You know what I mean?
Okay. And they have pretty high-class musicians at the People's Music School.
Amazing. I mean,
Yes.
yes. I saw their advisory board. It's like people from
It's
the
the
lyric, the
symphony.
symphony,
Right.
from the orchestra. It's like from the other opera theater besides the lyric, very famous people.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So let's wrap it up. Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.